Good evening, and thank you for joining us on another episode of Ask Sharifah. We've been having a lot of fun today. We've done quite a few interviews, but this interview is going to be a little bit different, not your typical interview. And that's really because we're going to find out a little bit about the person behind the company. But before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and ask you to do what I always ask you to do, and that's go ahead and share this Facebook Live, because friends don't let friends miss out on Ask Sharifah. So that's right. Go ahead and share it while I introduce our guest. Today's guest is Sandra Cooze. How are you this afternoon, Sandra?
I'm good. Thank you. How are you?
You are welcome. I am so good, and I'm excited to learn more about you. You are a holistic trauma coach and also the owner of Rise Above Your Story. Can you tell us a little bit, what is a holistic trauma coach?
A holistic trauma coach is basically a coach who helps people release their trauma.
Okay. Well, how did you become a holistic trauma coach then?
Well, I heeded Oprah's words and turned my wounds into wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
I was molested as a child, sexually assaulted a few times in my early childhood, and raped when I was 22. And I found a way to heal myself with holistic and spiritual practices. And I just felt drawn to pass it on to help others.
You know, not that many people come out and talk about their traumas, their pain, the things that they've been going through, molestation, sexual, it just trauma after trauma after trauma. And I'm glad that you, to a certain extent, sacrificed yourself and your experiences to come out and help other people. So again, before we go too far in this conversation, I definitely want everyone, I want to welcome Elliot, Cecilia, Gary. We have quite a few people who are coming into the chat room. So if you are listening to this, not only am I asking you to share this interview, but if you have any questions, any comments, please feel to write them in the comment section, and I'll go ahead and share them with our guest, who is Sandra Cooze today. Now, you went through so much, and I want you to feel comfortable to share or not share whatever it is, obviously, that you want to share. But you went through so much pain. What made you decide to say, you know what, I am going to help other people. I am going to make a difference in other people's life. And how was that easy for you to do?
Well, my journey was not easy, but I really found a way to release my trauma. So when I talk about my story, it doesn't hurt me anymore, which is one of the reasons why I called my business Rise Above Your Story. Because when you're traumatized, you're like in this box, like encased by your trauma. But when you heal it, you're rising above it. So yes, it is part of your story. It will always be part of your story, but it doesn't have to control you anymore.
So Francis in the comment section said, thank you for being so bold. So already we have people who are supporting you in your endeavors. Got a little kiss there for Francis. Thank you for tuning in. What made you decide to not only speak to other people, but to actually form a business helping other people?
On my journey to trauma healing, I found bits and pieces that counselors and psychologists could not help me with. For example, how should I explain this? There is something called somatic psychology. And somatic psychology means that in order to heal trauma, we have to heal the body as a whole. So body, mind, and spirit, because trauma takes hold in the whole system. For example, if you are raped, your body will always remember the feeling. Your mind will always remember the fear and the helplessness. And your spirit will always remember how, someone took something from you. In a sense, he didn't really took anything from you, but it feels like that. So in order to do trauma healing, you have to address all those points and release the trauma on every level. And when I started to understand that, I started to notice that in my clients, I'm a Reiki master besides a trauma coach, and I've noticed patterns of people who had trauma and how I could, just by talking to them, changing their mindset, really helping to start releasing. And I was always being drawn back to helping people, because I started to understand how trauma works in the body. And this is why I just feel it's my purpose.
Yes, most likely it is. And I'm just glad that you found your purpose. One of the things that you said earlier is because you were able to do this for yourself, then you went about helping other people. It is very difficult, I must say, to be able to heal ourselves. Usually we do need to go to psychologists or psychiatrists or doctors or healers or other Reiki practitioners in order to be able to heal that trauma for ourselves, because it's not easy to look at ourselves and look at all the little bits and pieces of ourselves and even know or determine what needs healing. How were you able to figure that out or determine that for yourself?
Well, about 2 years after I was raped, I went to see a psychologist because I didn't like the way I was. I was down, depressed. It wasn't myself, and I didn't want to stay that way. So I went to see a psychologist, and I talked to him for an hour about my story. And at the end of it, he said, "It sounds like you already worked through it all. What am I supposed to do?"
Oh, wow.
Yes. So I had no choice than to really look for different approaches, because I didn't like the way I was, and I didn't want to end up trying to find different releases.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't a person who was in bad crowds in school or anything. I was never really drawn into drugs or alcohol. I was lucky that way. But I didn't like myself. And the thing that really started my healing was actually a friend of mine back then. He was very spiritual, and back then I had no idea what spirituality meant. So one day he was standing in front of me, and he just said, "Get a quartz crystal already," as if I was supposed to know what that means. So I did what he asked, and he suggested I meditate. So I did that. 1 second, my cat is behind the laptop.
The cat wants to join the show. Welcome, Cat. And while we're welcoming the cat, we're going to go ahead and welcome James, Rochelle, Melvin, Janie. They entered the chat room, and Frances is there cheering for you. She said, "Love the you in you." So everyone is giving you encouragement right now.
Thank you.
So again, you said your friend talked to you about the crystals and meditation. So we're going to go back to that point.
Yes. So I did meditate with a crystal every night for 3 months. I was a different person. I wasn't healed, not by a long shot, but I felt lighter. I started to be more outgoing. I felt happier. So that was my introduction to crystal healing and spirituality. Mm-hmm. And after that, I just wanted to know more. Mm-hmm. And that's when my journey began.
So you went into different directions, obviously, because you said you're a Reiki healer now. You have different modalities. You work with people with trauma. You have your business Rise Above Your Story. So you took this experience, this horrific, traumatic experience, and you channeled that energy into something positive and something that was good that allowed you to help other people.
Exactly.
Oh, that's wonderful. Again, if you have any questions or comments for Sandra, we are discussing traumatic healing, her business Rise Above Your Story, and we thank you all for joining us. Now, where are you located?
I'm in Windsor, Ontario.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow. See, I love knowing where people are. I'm right here in Long Beach, California. You come across to us from Canada. Do you feel, have you been able to help people from all over?
Yes, here and there. Right now I'm working with a young woman from Germany. Mm-hmm. I am German, which makes it easier with the language. Mm-hmm. And
the accent.
Yeah, a little. People think I'm French, but nope, that's not it.
No, yes. It's wonderful.
Thank you. Yes, and locally I've been able to work with a couple of people, and slowly, step by step, it's building up. I mean, what I do is not the norm, so it takes some time to get people interested in my approach to trauma healing.
Mm-hmm. Why is your approach so unique?
First of all, because I work with the whole system. Mm-hmm. Like when you go to counseling and psychology and psychologists, it's usually mind-focused, releasing the trauma from the mind. But I also work with the body. Basically, we work towards where the trauma is, and then work on releasing it.
Does a person typically know where the trauma is, or is that for you to determine?
We will get there together, usually guide them.
Mm-hmm.
Because normally you can, if you really get asked the right questions, you can pinpoint in the body where sits that trauma, where is that feeling that feels weird, that feels bad, that makes me feel yucky. Mm-hmm. And then we work on releasing that, either with empowering questions, with visualizations, with Reiki sometimes if the person is open to it. If my client likes, we work with crystals. It's really broad on how I work. It all depends on, how the person would like to work with me.
Mm-hmm. Is it based on how they would like to work with you, or do you just all of a sudden feel a need to use this modality or use that modality in order to be able to serve this purpose?
It's kind of both. I mean, a lot of times people are open to spiritual practices. Mm-hmm. And I usually sense that. I mean, being spiritual, you get insights every once in a while, like what you're supposed to say, what you're supposed to do, what would help, mm-hmm. which is very nice to have that guidance. But yeah, usually then I talk with them about it and explain to them what it exactly is. And usually they're open to trying it.
Mm. Now, you again mentioned that you started with the crystals, you moved on from there, but you also said you get certain insight or you get certain guidance. Have you always experienced that all of your life, or just after you start with the meditation and on this journey of your life?
I think I've probably had the insight here and there all my life, but not having anyone who could explain to me what it was, what I was feeling or getting or seeing, I didn't have any help. But once I got into Reiki and more into spirituality and working with spirit guides and angels, then it really started to develop a little more.
That's very gifted. Again, if you are just now tuning in, if you have any questions, comments, we want to make sure you go ahead and share this interview, because we are talking about a lot of different things, including trauma and how to heal the trauma with Sandra Cooze. Now, Sandra, where can people find information on you?
Well, you can find information on me on my website, which is www.riseaboveyourstory.com. Under the same name, I'm on Facebook. Mm-hmm. And if you would like to connect with me, you can also send me an email at sandra@riseaboveyourstory.com. And I would love to answer all your questions.
Yes. When people come to you with their traumatic experiences, do you see a certain pattern? Do you see a certain type of client? You know, is it typically people who have been raped, typically people who have been abused? Or do you just see PTSD? Do you see traumatic occurrences just simply across the board?
Yes. Well, just because I'm a sexual assault victim doesn't mean I only focus on sexual assault survivors. Mm-hmm. Because trauma, in essence, is the same. It's the same path. The story is only different. But the way trauma works in the body is always the same. So I don't really focus so much on the story. Even though, yes, I will hear the story. And most of the time people come to me, they're really, for the first time, talk about it. And this is so important, because once you let it out for the first time, it already relieves such a pressure to just give it a voice, the trauma inside of you. That's so important. That in itself is healing. And so, no, I don't just focus on one kind of trauma. And PTSD, you have in any kind of trauma. For some, it's more severe than for others, but trauma and PTSD go hand in hand.
Absolutely. I definitely agree. Now, you mentioned you see different people, different types of trauma. How do people typically find you? Are they referred to you, through your website, search engines? For people who typically don't want to talk about their experiences, about what they've gone through, like you said, whether it's sexual trauma, military, whatever trauma it is, people don't necessarily want to speak about it, because when they speak about it, they have to relive those moments. I was having a conversation with someone I know the other day, and she was writing on social media. She made a post. She was feeling down. She was feeling sad. And she was saying she has PTSD, post-traumatic syndrome disorder, and she was never in the military, so it wasn't one of those things, but she had lost a child. And so it was, her child, losing a child is one of the hardest things in the world, something you don't wish on anyone. And so she was really down, and she was just saying that no matter what she did, she couldn't get it out of her mind. She still hears that phone call she received, remembers going there. Like, all of these things are playing out over in her mind over and over and again. How do you get people to open up, to talk about things that they really just, to a certain extent, would prefer to forget?
Well, people who find me are usually looking for a way to release. They are ready to release. Now, when trauma just happened, yes, counselors and psychologists should be the first step, because they will help you to cope. They will help you to cope with the trauma, to try and make sense of what happened, to find acceptance. So people who have really just been traumatized, they don't look for me. And I'm not the right person for them, and I would tell them that. Now, people who find me are those who feel they had counseling, for example, and they say it helped, but there is still something I cannot let go. That's when I can help. Or somebody who never went to see counseling, who thought they could deal with it on their own, and it's a few years after it happened, and they say, no, I feel that this has to heal, and I don't know where to start. These are usually the people that find me, either through word of mouth, or they're just guided. They're looking for trauma healing, trauma coaches, and if they're meant to find me, they will find me. I've seen it a lot of times happening.
That's beautiful. That's a beautiful way to look at it. And so now that it's one of those expressions, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. So, you create that opportunity. So now that they're really ready to hear, what is a session like you like? I mean, I don't want to go too far into your trade details. I know they have to have their consultation, different things. But is this a one-day session? They got to go to you for 8 months, 8 years. What is this process like for you?
Well, I hope it won't take 8 years. But usually when they're interested in working with me, then we set up a clarity session, which means it's like an hour we talk, and it's free, of course, complimentary, and we talk and see if they feel comfortable with me. Because what I do is I create a safe space for them where they can really open up and explore themselves in a new way. I created a questionnaire, a very detailed questionnaire that I ask my potential clients to fill out before the clarity session, so that we can go over to have a better idea of what we're dealing with. And then in the clarity session, we talk about it, and I suggest, give them examples of how I would approach this, and they get a couple examples of how they can already start the healing process. So, and then when I want to work with me, then it really depends on the trauma, how far they are, where we're starting. Usually it's a lot of visualization, empowering questions, homework, and energy work if they're open to it. If not, it's perfectly fine. A lot of mindfulness goes into it.
I can tell. Sandra, let me just ask you this. We talked a lot about what you offer people, what you give people, what you do to people. What is this process like for you? When you're working with or helping people, do you ever have, does it become too sensitive for you? Does it force you to relive your situations, or are you healed even more just by working and helping with other people?
Well, I think if I would be getting too sensitive, I would be in the wrong line of work. I mean, I am expecting to hear some very horrendous stories. But even though I will hear that, it is their story, so it is not mine. And my story doesn't affect me anymore. It really doesn't. Like, I really stepped out of it. Yes, I remember every little detail, but the emotion is not in it anymore. And it's the emotion that hurts us. It's the memory. So once we can release that, we can accept that this is part of our story. We had to make that experience. And it's okay because we moved on. And that's where I step by step get my clients. And this is a process.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say usually 4 weeks is very tight. I would say usually 8 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
and then see how it goes. Because when you start releasing trauma, a lot is coming up.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just the trauma itself, it's the whole protection that we built around that situation, because that's really what it is. The protection that we built to protect ourselves, that is what is holding us hostage in this moment. And that's what we have to release, to show our body, mind, and spirit that it is safe.
Mm-hmm.
Let it go. And it takes time.
It takes not only time, but someone such as yourself to hold their hand through the process. Now, when you went through the process, or when they're going through their process, what is that like? What is the moment like? Is there, all of a sudden 8 weeks, like you said, down the line, you just look up and you're like, oh, well, that doesn't affect me anymore? Or is it more as if you're going through a session, they're relaying the session, and then all of a sudden during the session, the feeling comes and it's like a eureka moment that the pain, the trauma is gone? How does that usually typically work?
Well, it's usually like quite a few little eureka moments.
Okay.
And it's like step by step. It's not like all of a sudden after 8 weeks, wow, I'm healed, I'm reformed, I can walk on water.
Right.
No, it's not how it works. It's the trauma healing will continue for quite some time, but we will start with the really bad stuff to release it. I show them practices. I work with them how to let it go. Then once you've released one emotional blockage, let's say it could be, I know, let's say a mother comes to me and says, my child was molested and I did not know how to help my child. And now my child is emotionally unavailable or totally closed off. And then the mother feels guilty for not being able to do anything, even though I would understand that because she had no idea what to do. She was totally overwhelmed. So we work on the guilt to release that there was nothing she could have done to prevent this, because when a child is molested, child molesters are the nicest people out there. They have to be. They have to gain the child and the parents' trust. So there was nothing the mother or the father could have done, unfortunately. And just to help a mother realize that is very helpful, so that I can let go of that guilt, so that I feel lighter, that I don't feel weighed down by the guilt anymore. So, and then we start working on, okay, how can you help your child now? Even after years of this happening, there are still ways she can help her child. So we work on that. I mean, I was molested when I was 12. So I know how it feels when you feel your mother doesn't do enough because she was completely overwhelmed. But I also know what I wish would have happened. So I can, from experience, help the mother, like what I would have liked my mother could have done back then.
You are so brave, Sandra. I'm sorry to hear that happened to you. And everyone, again, in the chat is rooting you on. G. Alfred Palmer says, hey there. Arnie joined us. Dundee joined us. Elizabeth Taylor joined us. Brenda, they're all listening to you and applauding how brave you are for sharing your story with the world. I mean, even now, even though you're not attached to it, it's not always easy to come up in front of the world and share with the world our vulnerabilities, our past, things that happened to us. But you, and I want to give, because I don't want to say it incorrectly, I want you to give us that line from Oprah again that you mentioned earlier of how you made this transformation.
That quote from Oprah was, turn your wounds into wisdom. And that just, it just resonated with me so much, and it made so much sense. And it came just at the right time when I was ready for it.
Did you feel as if you were wounded?
When I read that, no, not anymore.
I
already healed that.
But you learned, you pulled the wisdom out of it, and the wisdom is what you use to be able to assist other people.
Yes, because I did not think my story would be important.
Mm-hmm.
It was my story, who would want to listen to it.
Mm-hmm.
But then I got some guidance in form of some friends who said, your story, that's what you're supposed to work with.
Mm-hmm.
That's your mission. That's your purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And just hearing that and thinking about it for a couple of days, and it's like, yeah, this sounds right. This sounds exactly like what I'm supposed to do. Because I know how it feels to be a victim. I know how it feels to be a survivor. And I also know how it feels to let it go. And I found a way how to.
That's wonderful. And that's what people want to learn is the how. How do you do it? How do you get from one point to the next? Now, let's talk about, you mentioned you let it go, that it doesn't affect you. You're not emotionally attached to it. But let's talk a little bit about what were some of the changes in you that you saw? Because I love, my favorite channel is the ID channel. I love the ID channel. I love true stories, learning from other people's stories. And one of the things that I always notice is that I was going to call them the victims, but I'm not going to call them the victims. I'm going to call them the people who were affected. They, at the end, they see them, now they're married, now they have children, they're happy, they're living this life, and they didn't let their trauma or this traumatic experience destroy them. What are some of the differences that you saw in yourself?
Well, one of the key moments, I have to say, is when I realized that I was holding myself hostage.
Mm-hmm.
I was doing this to myself. I didn't allow myself to step out of my own comfort zone out of fear that it would happen again.
Mm-hmm.
So in particular, after I was raped, I gained weight,
Mm-hmm.
pretty much to protect myself. I stopped taking care of myself. I made myself invisible, literally. Now, 20 years later, I'm like, okay, I don't want to live like that anymore. And I still feel like a 20-something-year-old. And I was like, I'm 44. Why do I feel like 20 years old?
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, something just clicked. And I realized that in my early 20s, my life ended.
Mm-hmm.
And I never allowed that 20-something-year-old to experience life, have fun, go partying, because I was afraid that it would happen again.
Mm-hmm.
So then I realized that I'm not losing weight because I'm self-sabotaging, simply because I feel safe. I don't like the way I look, but I feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I realized I was holding myself hostage. I was stopping myself from letting go of the protection and just do whatever the heck I want.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah. So that was a key moment.
But how did that make you feel?
It was a big revelation because all of a sudden, everything else that I was doing to myself or allowing was the same thing. I was allowing it. It was not an outside source. I mean, the person who raped me has been 20 years in the past, and he probably forgot about me.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just me holding on to this and basically still giving that person control over me because I wouldn't let it go. And once that happened, everything got set in motion, and yeah, I started to release emotion after emotion, and blockage after blockage came up.
Mm-hmm.
And it still comes up, but it's a deeper thing that's not as important as what I've already released.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is what I would tell other survivors.
Mm-hmm.
Step out of your comfort zone and see that you will still survive if you do something that scares you. That's how I started to grow and outgrow my limiting beliefs. I just stepped out of my comfort zone. I'm on my first live video and ever. I mean,
Sharifah, yay!
So, yeah.
But you glowing, you look beautiful, you look amazing, you look happy, you haven't stopped smiling, and I think when we go through traumatic experiences, they're there to try to kill our joy and kill the human spirit, and it's just horrific when the human spirit is allowed to die, but you're to me, you seem like a fighter. Just not, knowing you for this brief amount of time, it's like you seem like a fighter, not necessarily with your hands, but you're like, I'm gonna fight to be happy. I'm gonna, nobody's gonna steal my joy, and you just kind of keep going. One of the things that you mentioned is that the blockages start still come up, or they may kept coming up. How do you know a blockage is coming up?
Well, usually I start to act a little different, like more defensively, or I also feel a lot like pressure, like where the sacral chakra is, like between the heart and the sacral. So, or more, the solar plexus in the center. I always feel like pressure. Then I know that something is about to release. And usually then I start having negative emotions like self-doubt and things like that out of the blue. And then I know, okay, something's coming up. Yeah, so it's really, I mean, at the beginning I didn't understand it, but now after years of releasing, it's just almost a routine. That I know, okay, something's coming up, let's work through this and let's let it go and see what happens after.
That is beautiful, wonderful. I'm just so proud of you. I mean, I just feel proud, like, for somebody who has just gone through what you've gone through, helping other people. So, Sandra, please give our viewers your website address again and how they can contact you.
Sure. You can contact me at www.riseaboveyourstory.com. At the same name, I'm on Facebook. And you can also send me an email at sandra@riseaboveyourstory.com.
Oh, wonderful. Now, what I like to do, because we are coming down to the end of the show, is just allow my guests the opportunity to speak directly to the viewers and let them know what you want them to get out of your interview. So I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes and you can have the floor.
Okay. Well, I do hope that this interview will inspire you never to give up to heal your trauma, because trauma healing is possible. I mean, look at me. I sit here smiling, I'm happy, and it's really possible. And it doesn't matter how hard the trauma was. Releasing is the key. And yeah, if you're brave enough, you're saying, I'm ready, then begin your journey. And if you have any questions, please reach out. I love to answer your questions and talk to you about trauma healing, give you tips if you like. If you like to think about working with me, then please contact me and we can schedule a free clarity session.
That's wonderful that you're so inviting. Just real quick before we have to go, because I heard one of the things you said, tips. Can you give us one tip before we have to go, please?
Always step out of your comfort zone. This is a big one. Because we're always trying to protect ourselves and always do the same thing. So sometimes we have to step out of that, do something that scares us. Even if it's, I don't know, if you're afraid of driving, go and drive and see that you're safe when you get there. Just see that, you will be safe even if you try and do something you normally don't do, because that's how you grow. You have to challenge yourself.
I love it. And you heard it here. Sandra, thank you for joining us on today's episode of Ask Sharifah.
Thank you for having me.
You are so welcome. And of course, we have to thank all of our viewers for tuning in. Elizabeth joined us. Torin joined us. We have quite a few people who watched this interview today. So thank you for watching it live. And to everyone who is watching this show in the archive, as always, please share this interview, because friends don't let friends miss out on Ask Sharifah. And if you're interested in being a guest or watching more of my interviews, please visit the website at AskSharifah.com. Until then, everyone have a wonderful night.